Hello everyone. So, here's the thing. I am adding on a second therapist. It's okay, everything's good. I think this is actually a good thing. Actually, what am I talking about? Anyone who needs help and goes to find a therapist, it's a good thing. That's a good thing. But for me, it just brought up all of these feelings that I hadn't felt in a very long time about therapists, and I kind of wanted to share that with you, and maybe that will help anyone out there who's struggling to go seek their first therapist or another therapist or whatever they need in their lives, just to know that you're not alone. I don't particularly like therapists in general. I really don't like the idea of someone who can stare at me with their soul-piercing eyes and pick out things about me that I don't necessarily know about myself. Or things that I'm not trying to communicate in that session that come through anyway. Observations and things about how my brain works and things that I didn't necessarily want to know. Because it's very hard to be in that position, to be vulnerable and to feel exposed and like you're on some sort of trial or something. And it's just awkward. Especially in those first couple of sessions where you're like still trying to figure each other out and you're like, are you gonna be any good for me? But the reason that I had to seek out this additional therapist is because there was a gap in the experience of my regular therapist in this specific area that I wanted to focus more on in my life. And I felt stupidly worried that my regular therapist was gonna feel like I was saying they weren't good enough for me or something, because I'm going outside of them for more help. But the reality is that if they're any decent professional at this, they want to see you get better. They want to see you reach that point in your life where you're happy. And if they don't have the tools to do it, then go, please, take care of yourself. And by far, the hardest part of actually going to a new therapist is setting all of that up. You gotta call people, you gotta work with insurance companies and figure out what's covered, what isn't, and why, and And then on top of that, you might do all of those steps and then find out that this person is not going to be able to help you because of whatever reason. Sometimes it's just not a good fit. I'm fortunate enough to have been extremely lucky in my quest for my therapists. I've landed them first time out of the gate every time. I don't know how or why the universe has allowed me to have this luxury, but I will take it. But that is not always the case, and sometimes your therapist is just not right for you, or sometimes you've been seeing them for years and you're no longer getting anything from them that you really need, or you're not getting all that you need, and it's just more of a waste of your time. And what I'm trying to say, I guess, is that it's okay to do what you need to do to take care of yourself. And I, for the longest time, thought that I was going to be terrible as a patient in therapy. I thought I was going to be completely closed off and not want to let somebody in on my private, personal, intimate thoughts about myself and my experiences and things like that. Which I know from the perspective of seeing this video on YouTube and all the other ones about my mental health on here sounds not accurate for someone like me, but there's a very big difference between my controlling what you're seeing in me versus being in a therapy session where it benefits me to try to be visible to this person and vulnerable, and that's really hard for me. You know, obviously with all the abuse I've been through and things like that, I have a hard time trusting people with things like that, you know? I genuinely thought that I was going to want to throw my therapist out a window. I, for the longest time, said that I would have to have therapy on a first floor because that way they'd at least survive. And I'm not a violent person by nature, but I really don't respond well to feeling cornered and under a microscope and all those kinds of feelings. But so much of therapy is what you bring into that session. If you're expecting to not think about anything, not process anything, walk into this office in 45 minutes every week and have the therapist just fix you for you, that's never going to work. You have to spend a lot of time outside of your session actually thinking and processing and dealing with all of those things so that you're not wasting your own time. This is an ongoing process that you're going to be working on constantly. And that's one of the bigger misconceptions about therapy, I find, is that people think that, oh, you go there and they fix you. No, you're fixing you. They're just a guide. they're going to try to guide you from point A that you're starting from to point B where you want to go based on how you're thinking about things. And there's no right or wrong way to think about things, and that's another misconception that I think people have a lot, that some thoughts are bad and some thoughts are good and feelings are the same way, but that's not really how it works. Your thoughts are your thoughts, your feelings are your feelings. You can't turn those off, that's how your mind works. So all your therapist is really doing, at least for what I have, is to try to alter the way you think about things or how you interact with other people to make the most of those situations. I guess the point I'm trying to make in this video is that this stuff is scary. When I was setting up my appointment with this new therapist that I've just taken on, I called the place, and for a few days my brain had been running through various scripts of like preparing me for interactions, like sort of like what you do when you had a fight with somebody and then you're in the shower later and you're like, oh, I should have said this, but like preemptively. And in none of those scripts did my brain prepare me for the possibility that I would have to leave a voicemail. So I'm on the phone and it's, oh, you have reached the center for whatever, and I leave a voicemail. Ah! I hung up. I didn't know what to do. I wasn't prepped for that. And yeah, it's scary. You're putting yourself out there. And with someone with my particular issues, you don't want to admit that you need help. You don't want to admit that this is something you can't do yourself. And that's okay. I've spent so much of my life trying to become independent that of course I'm going to be resistant to any loss of that in any degree. And I don't want to trust somebody. I don't want to have to explain to somebody every thought that I'm feeling about this thing and try to work through it because it's uncomfortable, and that's why I haven't dealt with it yet. But ultimately I know that I'm not gonna make any progress on this issue if I don't get help for it and if I just ignore it. So yeah, it's uncomfortable. You're sitting there, you don't know what you're walking into, you may be physically uncomfortable if you have anxiety. And that's okay. That's an okay way to feel. You're not gonna just be comfortable in all situations. Sometimes you have to go through something that's a little awkward to try to get to the thing that you really want. It does get easier, I will say that. Because I've been seeing my regular therapist for about 3 years now. And I'm like, why am I so nervous to meet this new therapist? I've been doing this for 3 years. I know how to do therapy, right? Aha, says my brain, but you don't know how this therapist works or if they're going to be any good for you or even know what you're talking about. You're probably just crazy. Well, you, brain. I guess what I'm trying to say is that it's normal to feel nervous about this. It's normal to be uncomfortable with somebody when you're just meeting them. This is effectively a stranger that you're now telling your most intimate thoughts and feelings to, and you don't know what's going to happen with that. Yeah, you have some reasonable expectation they're not going to blab about it to all their friends or whatever, but it's still hard to trust that initially because it is still a person. And I think that's another important point. This is a person. Sometimes your therapist is going to make mistakes. They are human. We have not yet developed the technology to make a robot that's also an effective therapist. I'm sure they're working on it. But you need to be willing to allow both yourself and that therapist to make mistakes because you are human. If they can't allow you to correct something that you phrased wrong where they misunderstood where you were going with it, then maybe that's not a good fit for you. Basically, you should be okay with the fact that you're not going to be perfectly prepared for this session any more than your therapist is. Yeah, it's their job to help you work through all these things, but again, so much of what you get out of therapy is what you bring into your session. Your therapist can't fix you. You can fix you, and that's it, and they're your guide. That's how this relationship works. And if you're expecting something else, then of course you're gonna have trouble with it. So if you're struggling with something right now, and you need help with it, or even if you feel like you would do better having help with it, don't be ashamed, don't be afraid, don't put all this pressure on yourself. Just do your best to get help. Because when you have help with these things, it just speeds you up so much. I know that I could have survived with my PTSD, my anxiety, all of those things. I could have been okay. But it wouldn't have taken me 3 years to get to that point. It would have taken me 6, and God only knows who I would have hurt along the way. So go out there and do what you gotta do to get your life together, because when your life is more in your control, you feel so much more better about it. And I guess that's it for this video. So a bit of personal news, I'm also recording an audiobook right now. It's for an indie author in the UK, which is kind of interesting because he wanted someone with a North American accent, and he wanted somebody to play a mentally troubled teenage angsty boy, so I guess he heard this voice and thought, yeah, that'll work. So yeah, what I'm trying to say is that the X-Files video is just a little bit delayed. I'm getting to it. I have finished most of the season. I've got the one episode remaining that I've been holding on to because I really want to save it for a good day when I can actually record right after it. This is not that day. So yeah, I have a few things going on right now. But I'm managing it, in part thanks to the efforts of 2 therapists. And I'm not ashamed of that. If I need 2 people to help me get through this, then that's what it takes. So thank you for stopping by. I'll be back again next week with another video that I hope you find interesting. Fingers crossed on the X-Files. But until then, as always, stay curious.